Hi, my name is Katie Schuler. I'm a marketing program specialist here at Time4Learning. I'm also a longtime homeschooling mom. My oldest son, Bailey, used Time4Learning from second grade all the way through high school, and he graduated from our homeschool in 2017. My youngest son, Braden, has been thriving with Time4Learning since preschool, and he's currently in 11th grade. Today, we have Merve Lapus joining us. Merve is responsible for outreach and engagement strategies for Common Sense Education. He's here to share tips about integrating technology into education. If you enjoy this interview, please subscribe to our channel and like us on social media to see more fun episodes of Tales from the Homeschool Front. Hi, Merve. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Katie. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So to start us off, if you could tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself and your role with Common Sense Media and kind of who Common Sense Media is.
Sure. So my name is Merve Lapus. I'm the Vice President of Education Outreach and Engagement. And my role, or the work that I do with Common Sense is a national nonprofit whose whole focus is dedicated to improving the lives of kids and families by providing trustworthy information, education, and an independent voice when it comes to navigating media and technology. And we do that in really three core ways. We rate, educate, and we advocate. So on the rating side, a lot of families know us. They come to our site to just get some insight into any kinds of media, movies, books, TV shows, websites, and just kind of look at it through what's developmentally appropriate for their child. Not what rating is out there, 13 and up, but really how much violence, how much insight around kind of roles and how are people being depicted. Like these are things parents actually really want to consider before exposing their children. So we want to make sure that we provide almost kind of like that nutritional label around what to expect with what you're getting. And then on the education side, we work really closely with schools and educators and just establishing a whole community approach at how we look at the way that technology and media plays a role in the way that kids live and learn. And then also just none of that can happen if we don't have great policies and legislation moving forward that's kid-centric and really making sure that we're putting kids first.
I love that. And I love that you talked about making, it's not about an age or a rating. It's really about what families are trying to make appropriate for their situation and their children. We found, so I have two children. They're not so much children anymore. They're 22 and 17. But, what we considered appropriate for 13 in our house could be very different for what other people would say would be appropriate for their 13-year-old. And I think that that's important. I know, as we looked for resources to guide us when my boys were younger, it would be difficult of, okay, so this is 14 and over, but he's 12, should I even consider this? And obviously parents are going to make that, they're going to kind of go in
Sure.
depth in their own, but it does help to have a guide and to know that, your organization, you're not holding fast to 12 or 13 or 7. It's definitely.
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely look at the developmental milestones that are typically happening. And so we'll give it a rating to give you a general idea of what to look at, but you should never stop there. It's a good placeholder, right? To like, about 9 or about 14 or whatnot. And we've got a lot of kids and families that chime in to say, oh yeah, I agree with this. Or actually, like I'm 9, I watched it and this is actually good for me. Here's why. And oftentimes there's much more to it than just kind of the trailer or just kind of the overview, right? There's some really in-depth types of themes or roles that you really want to highlight for your kids. And that could be the reason why you make that decision. But as long as you as a parent or a caregiver know what you're coming in, you can start engaging in those conversations. And as we go into this conversation, it's about normalizing those types of conversations and not just having it when an issue arises, right? I think that's some of what we work a lot with families and especially with educators, is that it's not just when an issue comes up that you talk about these types of things, it's that they're a part of the way you're always communicating. And so if something does go left field, you know that they can come to you and it's about being able to support and walk through these issues versus only when things are a problem that you come to me. There's a lot of missed opportunity being able to help guide the growth around kind of digital citizenship and media and technology, its effects as it becomes more and more ubiquitous for learning in life.
Yeah, for sure. And absolutely. Especially in the last couple of years, there's always room for these conversations. There's always time for these conversations, but definitely in the last couple of years, we've seen so many things that, really, really big, important issues that families have to discuss. And, like you said, getting a jump on those and figuring out, it's really hard as a parent. Like I know how I would want someone to speak to me about this issue, but that's not the same way that I'm going to speak to an 8-year-old or a 5-year-old or even a 15-year-old. And so to have that and to have kind of, organizations like you and people who can help us and kind of give us a starting point and a framework for, this is good for this age range and this is good for this one. So
well, happy to do that. And I've got an 8 and a 10-year-old. So I live it and breathe it at the same time, which is kind of cheating, but I'm very thankful for it.
It's not cheating. It's life experience.
Yeah, totally.
So getting into our questions, what are some of the trends that you're currently seeing in integrating technology into education? And how has the past year accelerated this?
So, we've learned a lot from just kind of the switch over between having to go distance learning to now going back and from the classroom down to just even homeschool. It's like technology is playing a big role. And if anything, we've found that technology is playing an even bigger role now when everyone had to go online. So there's this kind of new kind of adoption of technology in our lives, whether it's a parent providing the direct instruction and using technology so that they can align to the standards of a classroom or to their own kind of learning goals, or classrooms having to kind of now go online for a brief moment and then coming back. Those transitions have been really challenging, but we've learned a lot. And I think some of the biggest trends with just kind of technology integration is that we're seeing that teachers are starting to really increasing their use of technology. They've been using it for years. There's always been a new technology, right? But looking at Chromebooks, iPads, and all these other devices, those adoptions are coming through pretty quickly. And being able to, build up their confidence in how they use it is a big goal right now, especially with all the technology coming in. It was just about looking to bring in a digital form of what you might have been doing kind of pen to paper or cover to cover, and then bringing it to the digital world. Now it's recognizing that there's actually so much power behind some of these tools when used appropriately that can better assess where your kids are at, better recommend what you want to do, and then even better more deeply surround them with opportunities for creativity and collaboration. So we're seeing that professional development is becoming a really big focus and a really big need, especially this year because of the past year or so. A big surge in PD, big surge in understanding the effects of the technology in the lives of kids. For some kids are thriving with it. For others, it is kind of that place where they need to take that break in order to better connect them to real connections and other forms of learning. So there's a lot of moving pieces that's happening, right? But we know that with this has also led to a high increase of recognizing and understanding student privacy and recognizing that all this information is going somewhere, what is being done with it. And so I think those are some of the heightened areas that as educators and parents, we're starting to see more technology coming in, embracing it, but really wanting to embrace it to really kind of meet a particular need, understand its functionality, as well as how does it play a social role, and then recognizing how is it using our information, and is it being used appropriately. Those are some of the rising trends we're seeing.
And those are great to talk about, and it makes sense. It's also something that's interesting for people like me. So my youngest, my 17-year-old, he had his own computer before he could hold crayons. I mean, we're just technology centered as far as things like that. And, it's sometimes it's a little harder to take a step back and really process that for many families, what happened last year and that leap to learning online, that was not something, it's not like their kid already had experience with technology as far as internet safety or using a computer. So, I mean, in addition to trying to find these resources to help them, educate at home and all of these things, that it's really kind of wild to think that they were also implementing the use of technology for the first time. Their kids didn't have the little tablets to play on because that wasn't something they were ready to introduce. And so to be kind of pushed into that amidst all of the other stuff that they were pushed into. So it's interesting, the trends that you mentioned, they seem reasonable. Obviously, like I said, someone who's definitely technology based, but I imagine that is a concern that so many parents, that thrust into technology before they were ready. So you're teaching them how to teach their children about internet safety. And that's a big thing.
Yeah, that is a big thing, is getting a sense. And we oftentimes with parents, so for education or even just for life, having families and parents and caregivers understand their connection to what technology means to them is going to be just as important as being able to help guide their children or the kids that they support through the use of that technology. Because we are supposed to be their role models, and quite often parents, just calling it out now, are probably the biggest hypocrites when it comes to it. I see parents spending more time on, I mean, Facebook is their thing, now a little more TikTok and Instagram, but for kids are on everywhere else, like Instagram and every other one that's coming up. But parents are spending a lot of time on their own platforms, whether it
Sure.
be, for news or social or whatnot. And then it's very easy for us to say, oh, you spend way too much time on your device, you need to get out. And so there's a lot of miscommunication in terms of expectations and actual use. And so understanding your role with it, what it means to you, and then how do you communicate that down, especially when it's now a part of their learning environment, right? Are you measuring those two things the same? Oh, you spent all your time already for school, you don't have any personal time. But at the same time, you can't go outside because now kids just can't go outside to the park across the street without me being there. And that becomes a whole nother issue, just of differences of the way that our kids are being raised. I remember going out till, as long as the street lamps didn't turn off,
We came home at dark.
I was good.
Absolutely.
I was good.
Absolutely.
It's very different now. And so, developmentally, our kids are going to want to be where their friends are at. That's developmentally what they should be doing. Sure. And we have to be comfortable and recognize those spaces have changed, right? So finding that balance, it means something to them.
And recognizing that there's a use, I have bonded, not any more so than I would have, but my boys and I now have these jokes with one another and these references that we make from online interactions that we wouldn't have had. I mean, I can't tell you the number of TikToks that we shared back and forth because did you see the dog? Did you see what this dog did? So, I mean, like you said, recognizing kind of what it means to us and being a good role model, but also utilizing it safely in a way that encourages even more communication and relationships. And, we didn't have text messaging growing up and broaching difficult subjects to talk to our parents about, kind of that cold call kind of thing. Like, I just need to go to my parents and tell them this. We used text messaging when my boys were growing up. If there was something that, they wanted to talk to us about, but they were a little uncomfortable and they maybe wanted to see how we could react, or maybe even tell us ahead of time, because my affect is going to go through a range of emotions depending on what you tell me. And we utilize text messaging for that. Some people don't like that and they think that, you should just be able to speak to one another. And I agree with that, but recognizing that, these tools can be really good resources in a lot of ways.
I mean, the emoji has changed the game of communication. In either, sometimes you're like, oh, I don't know what to read it, like how to read through this particular emoji. And other ways, it really helps to add and accentuate how you feel, which is amazing.
I wish I could emoji with my face, because sometimes even what I'm trying to say, I wish that I could kind of have that emoji overlay so they know that, I'm winking because I'm telling you a joke, but I really mean it, so absolutely. We often find that parents that are considering homeschooling worry that it's not an effective option. So how do you help parents feel comfortable with their children learning online?
Yeah, I definitely hear that. We've heard that, many times, at least in my work that I've done with schools and parents that are supporting kids at home. And I think the real thing, and this comes down to just kind of setting some real guidelines, right? Understanding what things are for, how to use and when to use it, and then being able to recognize what are the things that you enjoy doing and why. And a lot of that is in ongoing conversation. Now, it's also very, very good, thing to do, just to be vocal with what are your concerns. Like I tell my kids all the time, like, okay, I get it. You want to play if it's their personal time and they want to play on Roblox, I'm like, here are the things that make me uncomfortable with that platform. I've seen too many of this and this and this and that. When those things happen, I need you to let me know when those things happen so that I know how to help you navigate past those things. But just to say, I don't want you on there but 90% of their friends are on that. Now, all of a sudden they fear, they've got the fear of missing out. They feel like they're like not the only ones. That's something as a parent, you got to kind of like balance out. It's like, all right, how do I, not make you feel like you're the only person that does that, you're not able to communicate with your friends. And that, how do I also empower you to understand where my concerns are and give you the language and give you the steps to take so that when you do run into something that's uncomfortable, one, you know how to deal with it, or two, you know to come to me, and it's not going to be a straight up, that's it, it's gone, but let's navigate through this and work through this. And then how are you feeling about seeing that? What do we need to do next time? And that's where a lot of the big anxieties come from, let alone just, oh, you're going to be online. For learning, I'm concerned with your exposure or what you might be seeing. Those are, I mean, that's the stem of it. It's inappropriate content. It's, staring at the screen, like knowing when is it appropriate, like when do you need it versus when do you shut it to go and apply it into something else. But that's also common practice with, if you're watching a show, when do you pause it and say, so what do you think happened here? Like, how do you think that person's feeling? They haven't answered that yet. I want to get a sense if you know where the story's going, like making it an active way that you start and stop and pause and apply. That's where now technology provides a whole nother layer that you might not get, right, in just more traditional format. You can get it through books, sure, but you can't watch along or read over their shoulder. It's hard to read.
Right. So yeah, I mean, that's something basic. Obviously, technology is this huge, incredible, encompassing thing, but something is basic. You talked about books. When we were younger and we were reading books, and I was an avid reader, but even loving to read, there were always opportunities for me to build my vocabulary. So I would find a word in a book and I'd have to stop. I'd have to put that book down and I would go find a dictionary or an encyclopedia or some other, ancient piece of, reference material.
Card
but
catalog?
now, like, yes. And now, like, my son reads on an iPad. So he reads through either iBooks or a Kindle app, and all of the online reading tools, he can highlight a word and find out what that means without ever having to leave that page. He's not going to stop the story. He's not going to lose his progress or lose track or lose focus. He's going to be able to really find that. So, and again, I know that's a small thing in technology, but to your point,
but it's important. Celebrating those small things, especially for a parent or caregiver who's just starting to introduce these things. So as someone who does professional development all the time, when you highlight the big, amazing things technology can do, you're actually making it scarier for a lot of new users, like new parents, new caregivers, or even new educators to use technology. We should really focus on highlighting all the great things you can do that are just, exactly, the little things that you save time because you're able to do it this way, you're more efficient. So now you can actually build in more. Right? Versus just
small,
a big
not scary.
Oh, look.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's something that we need to do better with, actually.
And I love, pointing out little things like that can make it less scary and less, big wide world. It's just a small little piece of a benefit for you. And this is how technology can help you. So I like that.
Yeah, for sure. Starting with substitution. I mean, you're substituting something you've done before, doing it in this way, which can add more value, and here's how.
I like that, substitution. That's not something that you often think about, but it's true. Board games have, evolved into online video games, learning games, reading, e-readers and online reading and audiobooks. We had those, but I mean, I remember, I don't even have to go down that track because I'll just completely date myself. But even something as simple as an audiobook, I don't have 63 CDs that I'm going to have to keep track of and change out. It's just one solid MP3. So so little things and substitute. I like that. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you hear about learning online?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of misconceptions. I think one, that online learning or distance learning has been a disaster for everyone. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest ones, especially this past year. But the reality is that our learners are just so different. And just like some of us might be very physically different in the way that we look and we look at them the way that kids learn. And it's also just as different from wanting to learn in the classroom to wanting to learn solo from home. Right? We've especially seen this in kids with learning differences. So like, especially with kids with like ADHD, for instance, they might find that learning from home actually limits the distractions that they have in a classroom. So they've actually been able to be more effective learning from home or learning digitally, right? So those are things to consider. It's that it didn't go bad for everyone. In many cases, kids have thrived. I know one of my own children really thrived in being able to move further than she was able to in her traditional classroom. She's back in school now in person, but she had a lot of growth, even at a time that we all felt was, oh man, there's some, these are some impediments now that we have to deal through. Not the case for everyone, right? We also know that being online could also, enhance the classroom experience in ways that we didn't have before, like flexible start times, the ability to move around and not be locked to just one desk during the day, or to work at your own pace. Like there's more flexibility in this learning space now than we've had before. And we've also heard that it's reduced the overload for a lot of students, where their days have just been packed with like classes and extracurricular activities. Being able to kind of take that break and just be able to do what they need to do, and then actually have time to transition to something that's about them. I felt the same way. I haven't had to commute to work for a while. I've been going in a little bit here and there now. But that time in the mornings, I've lost 3 hours a day in commuting, and I've got that
And what
back
can
now.
you do with that? Yeah. What
Oh
can
my
you,
gosh.
how can you, whether it's personal time, it's family time, it's a combination of both. But when you really process 3 hours and you say one chunk of time, 3 hours, that's okay. That's 3 hours, but add that to a 5-day work week. That's 15 hours of time. That's an entire waking day.
My
What can you
own
do with
mental
that?
health was like, being tested, and I didn't even realize it. It was my daily grind. And at that time, my kids were going to school with us, because I live, like, their school was next to my work, because of, just for me, safety reasons. I'd rather have them close by, and my work was not in my neighborhood. So they were on that track with me. That's exhausting, right?
It's a lot. And, there are days when of course you can bond, you can have really meaningful conversations, but then there are days when you're running late, the weather's bad, there's traffic, that you're going to get to the office and you have this many things that you have to do. So you're already working on that. Yeah, yes. And you're going to try to quiz them. So as adults, as working adults, if we can recognize what that extra time means to us, imagine what that does for these children. And like you said, they have goals, they have dreams, whether that's athletic dreams, whether that's career focus, arts. What could they do with that much time in their day? And then when those passions and those dreams, which are could be unrelated to school at all, but it gives them an entirely new way to look at what their school day is like, because they're not 8 hours in a classroom, then they're not 45 minutes on a bus. They have all of this time. So
cutting out those commute connections, and then adding like, I'm home doing all this, and now I'm like really into soccer, and now right after school I can just go straight to the soccer field, versus having to come home, get dressed, or do any of that, or wait for a bus, that then connects me in circles to get to where I need to be. Oftentimes can be less stress.
And I think it's important, like you had mentioned before, recognizing small things and substitutions, but recognizing things like this as well. One, that not everybody had a really bad experience with virtual learning, but even those that maybe didn't have the best experience, they made up for it in other ways with that additional time, with that extra focus. So, find ways to really highlight and showcase the positives from a situation.
For sure.
Some of our parents worry about screen time and the amount of exposure children have to technology. We hear this all the time, and it's certainly prevalent when parents are considering an online curriculum. But what is your recommendation for finding a healthy balance?
Sure. Well, for a while now, I know that many media researchers have been really advocating for shifting from screen time and screen quantity to really more content of quality, right? So are you using your screen time, if you're using the term, but is it effective, right? What kind of screen time are you using, and the quality of it versus just the time you're being spent on it? Because all screens are not created equal. That's one of the things that we say. All screens are not created equal. And we know the screen time really shouldn't be lumped together as educational, entertainment, et cetera, all in one, right? Context matters a ton.
That doesn't seem fair. If they have to spend 4 hours doing school online and they have a screen limit of, less than that or just over it, I think personally, all that's happening is they're not going to appreciate any of the positives that can come from learning at home. All they're going to focus on is, oh great, all of my time
it's been taken up.
Yeah, I have no time for this because math took forever, so
for sure.
It's definitely, I love that quality of content versus time is key. So, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I love what you were saying about, that is key. That is, you can't just lump it all together, even if they're on a tablet, which most people don't really associate with a resource. It's more of a toy rather than a tool. But even if children use tablets in their education, they may have a hard drive full of games, but that doesn't mean that, just because they're on the tablet,
what's the quality of the games that are in there? Some of them are actually really, and so that brings me actually to, for a parent or a caregiver who's thinking about, all right, what do I need to consider then in terms of like quality time? So there are the 4 C's that we mentioned. It's connection, critical thinking, creativity, and context, right? So as you're thinking about those things, so in terms of connection, just knowing that it's really important that kids connect on a personal level with what they're watching, playing, and reading. So are they engaged? Are they engrossed? Maybe even enlightened by what they're watching? Getting into a storyline or identifying with a character that really primes a kid for learning. So how well are they connecting with the content or the people or the characters? And then in terms of critical thinking is really looking for media that takes a deeper dive into a topic or subject or skill. Maybe it's a game in which kids wrestle with ethical dilemmas or strategize, bypassing obstacles, right? Or even just kind of like the rote quizzes and simple Q&A style games may be fun and educational, but really helping them to kind of dive deeper into more long-lasting meaning, right? In terms of creativity, it's looking at important features around some of these products that give the ability for kids to create new content that's representative of them. A new level for video gaming or song creation, or traditional more creation like art creation stuff. Those are things that really help kids' minds kind of like spin in different directions, which is amazing. And then understanding context. So how do you help your kids understand that how their media fits into their larger world is just as important. So, oh, you like creating these movies. What are you going to do with them? How does it provide more value? What messages are you trying to connect to others, right? Or you like watching other kids play video games. Why? Like, how are you going to apply it? How are you going to maybe do something different based on what you've learned, right? That's one of the things you hear a lot from parents. Why do my kids like watching other kids play video games? They just don't play it themselves. And I always say, why do you watch a lot of people like re-renovate their home, but you're not doing anything with your home?
Right. And I have no plans to do so either. But
Exactly, right?
I mean, I am not about to knock out this kitchen wall, but I will watch someone else do it.
For sure.
What am I learning from that? I don't know. I'm sure that I will apply that to something later. Maybe someone I know is personally going to remove that kitchen wall. Yes.
You might want to consider it.
Yes.
Right?
And
yeah.
You were talking about like content and how people create. And that's another thing, I could use personal examples with like GarageBand and my son and how he creates music, not just individually, but with a group of friends all online. They live in a different state and they record music and they create the same, but art. And, we talked about iPads and parents kind of lumping that screen time in with what they do. But one of the things that I've seen in a lot of people, especially in the art field, like digital drawing, families to buy their budding artist all of these, handheld pens, specific types of paintbrushes and markers. It's hundreds of dollars in supplies, but they have that at their fingertips with the tablet because it's, it's not exactly the same, but they're going to learn to shade. They're going to learn to use these different mediums. So it's all about, I really appreciate that, sharing that it really is about the quality of content and what their goal is with the content. And sometimes even just playing, first person video game, there's still something that's going to be kind of gleaned from that.
Yeah, as a parent, like taking the time to understand what they're on and why they enjoy it, and then using that moment to be able to connect it to those larger like life goals. Like I love that you're connecting with other kids and strategizing how to meet this objective. Remember, like language and the way you talk to people is important.
Absolutely.
On the other end, they're experiencing it. So you set your kind of your expectations and your norms as kind of like
goals. Mm-hmm.
Exactly, right? And that's technology agnostic. It doesn't have anything to do with the technology, right? But you're applying it then into something that they enjoy doing that's giving them this construct of experience that they appreciate, that gives them that feeling of excitement or joy or fun or whatever it might be.
Yep, absolutely. One important element that makes for a successful homeschool year is creating an optimal learning environment. What are the optimal conditions to make for a successful digital life?
Yeah, so I actually learned a lot about this stuff this particular year. So I mean, common sense, we don't typically design our content for for homeschool. We see it used a lot, but last year, everyone was homeschooled for an amount of time. So we learned a lot about this really quickly. And so some of the big things that we learned in working with these families and parents and caregivers and even schools is one, just kind of like making a space, creating a special personalized corner or room dedicated to their learning. So they know that this is, where my work is. And even if you don't have a large space, because a lot of these families that we work with, are living in small quarters or smaller areas. Just,
Of course.
giving them a small space that's like with their crayon box always marks their space, and like that's their space, right? This is where I come to learn and do my work. That's important. Setting a routine, having some level of consistency, when things end, stop and break, like really helps to add to that environment. They know what to expect and when things are coming. But also making sure that you're reviewing what the expectations are and being consistent, right? Just kind of plopping them down and saying, okay, let's get started, doesn't give them enough to work off of. And especially when you're inconsistent, can cause a little more anxiety with the whole like learning experience. And that's just in general, right? For some kids and for some families, keeping them close is going to be really important. Just not that you're always watching over them, but that that if something does occur or happen, you can be there to help
Sure.
kind of redirect, right? But then also, as kids are learning and maybe even going through self-driving experiences, like really praising that their self-regulation. It's like, great job getting through that. Like really explicitly showing that they're working past maybe a different learning environment, but they're doing things that are actively helping them, right? For younger kids, it's about making it fun, like playing pretend, like, all right, now you're going to be in school. This is your work. So I'm going to be here doing mine. And you're almost like role playing, but they're focused on school. But it seems
Right.
like
And
you're
it
in the
makes a
same office.
difference. Yes. And it
Yeah,
does. It plays a large role. It's fun. It's their space. It's their office.
totally.
As an adult, I've played the VR office game on my Oculus. Why?
Yeah, right.
Why?
Oh, that's
But it's
awesome. I mean,
fun. But I
but
mean,
that
it's
is
just
that is
fun.
part of the presentation. Like
Hmm.
presentation is everything. If you set it up, all right, now we got to go through this math experience, right? Versus, all right, we're going to go through math. I know it's not your favorite, or like I know you love math, so we're going to try something a little different. Like the way you present something is going to be just as important.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? So really bringing those types of elements in is going to be really helpful as you look at that kind of learning environment. And then I think the last thing is just making sure that you're an open resource, and knowing that they can always get help when they need it, right? Not that it's not just them going at this alone, right? And just knowing that they have support, whether it's from you or an external person who might be digitally connected, to kind of help them through things, letting them know where their dial a friend or dial for help is located.
And that's key. I think that's important too for parents. When my boys were younger and I took on the responsibility of homeschooling, there were a lot of times that I was really second guessing myself, or second guessing, the decision because of my skill set and my ability. And I think that it
Yeah.
was really important for my children to know, if they ask me something, what does this mean? I really tried to, I don't know, but let's find this out together. So we're going to look this up. We have all of these resources available, and you and I are going to sit down and we're going to figure out what this means. And I think that it's important to show that you don't have to have all the answers. You just want to make sure that you can find out how to get them. But then it opened up doors to, over time, that research that we did together, morphed into, do you have a phone equipped with Google? You could look this up, you can find out, So, but yeah, it's a, always know that they can come to you, but you don't have to have the answers. As long as you are willing to find these answers together, acknowledge that you don't know the right answer, but you're willing to look
Mhm.
it up. I think that's really important too.
That brings up actually one more thing, Katie. So using movement is also incredibly important. So one of the things you mentioned earlier, it's like, oh yeah, I didn't, when I was reading through a book and I needed a new vocabulary word, like I'd have to pause, I'd kind of, have to go here and find, and sometimes it was like me having to walk to the library to find everything, right? They don't have to do that now. But the kind of the experience of, right, what's the word? Okay, now let's go walk to the library, and it's literally taking a lap around the room and then jumping onto the app to find the information. That break keeps them in the frame of like, we're doing research and we're finding things out, we're still learning, but a physical movement adds to the experience for learning in a way where just kind of sitting stagnant and just kind of going through, and yeah, all those great shortcuts
Never
are there, but
moving.
it keeps you sitting. So how do you find movement in a in a learning space that might feel a little confined? Breaking it up in
Make
those
it up.
experiences, yeah, and just again, it's
That's a
part of the role
great
play, but it's part
tip.
of the movement.
That's wonderful. And that's not something that I would have thought about, especially having older kids and, kind of getting set in routines. But I think that that's absolutely incredible. And I love that. And I'm going to remember to share that to other new parents, because one of the things that I do is, encourage these new parents who are homeschooling. There's a lot that they have to figure out, but they don't have to figure it out on day one. So, but that's a great tip, to really let them know, break up your day. You're worried about sitting there at the desk or sitting on the sofa or at the dining room, wherever you have the space to sit. But I love that. Walk to the library, maybe go to a science lab, or, take a field trip, but your field trip is within the house or in
You're
the
still coming
yard.
back to
So
the same device, but it's
absolutely,
just that
that's great.
act,
That's a
right?
wonderful tip. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
How can parents, and this one is so big, and it's one that I think a lot of people struggle with, even outside of pandemic and everything that's going on. How can parents support their children's mental and emotional well-being during a transition to at-home online learning? And are there times where homeschooling can improve their mental health?
Yeah, well, I mean, social emotional learning is really key here. It helps kids to build the skills that they need, like how to understand and manage their own emotions, expectations, empathizing with others, right? Perspective taking. And so building and supporting these healthy relationships is going to be incredibly important. One of the things is just finding the time for mindfulness and relaxation. Oftentimes can feel just on the go. And again, I mean, one of the recommendations is have a schedule, make sure they know what's moving on. Make sure part of that schedule is to take stock of where they're at, how they're feeling, what they need, right? And that goes for you too, as a parent or caregiver, helping to guide, a child through learning at home. You want to make sure that you can talk to them about the places that they actually feel supported. So I enjoy when I'm doing this because I've got my friends here. I know I can connect with people here. Or I don't enjoy these spaces because I feel alone. I don't feel like I'm being seen, or I don't feel like I have an opportunity to really connect. Really take stock of what are those experiences, so you know when you need to be there with them to help them through it, versus when you can kind of let them just kind of go because they've got a support structure or a network already that's a part of that experience, right? Another thing is just kind of like really thinking twice. I mentioned this earlier. Thinking twice before you just kind of take the device or take the experiences away because they might have run into something that you felt was kind of sketchy or just something you didn't want them to get exposed to. That's one of the number one reasons why kids won't go to their parents or whomever is supporting them, is they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to have the device taken away. And so really kind of setting that tone that it's not about taking it away. If I need to take it away, it's because you've done X, Y, or Z. So, set that precedent. But you can come to me with anything, and we need to help figure these things out together. It's when you don't come to me, this is what I tell my kids, it's not that you did something wrong. It's the fact that you hid it from me or that you didn't. That's why something is being done now. If you came to me immediately, we would figure this out together. And that's what my goal is here, right? So really just kind of being explicit about that. And then especially as you kind of look at, as social media, in its traditional form, as well as social in the learning pieces. So something like a collaborative Google Doc has social built into it, from the way that kids use chat
They
function.
interact, they chat. Yeah.
Exactly. There's so many different ways that social media and the untraditional ways have been embedded into these learning resources. So start really watching for those kind of warning signs. If kids are starting to kind of like change their demeanor, or maybe don't want to go onto a certain tool that they've been on before, like there are opportunities to really get a better sense of what might be happening. And again, coupling that with, it's not about taking things away, but better understanding what they're going through or what the issues are. That's really important. Another thing to do is really just kind of create a family media agreement, something where you can help set those expectations with each other for what they do online, how much they have access to certain things and certain accounts, so that you can help better guide kind of the decisions as you're helping to build up the way that they use these resources, right? Especially for those new families using technology, setting a baseline that everyone is going to conform to, as simple as 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever at time, everyone is disconnecting and charging and leaving it outside. We don't take any of these things to our room. We know that technology plays a big role in everything in our lives. So it's not about limiting the amount of time we have, but it's about setting sacred times. When we can eat together, no devices at the table. So like, it's a lot easier to say, these are sacred times with technology versus you can only have this amount of time, because oftentimes we lump it all together. Like we were talking about earlier, it's like, all of it was consumed with school. Now I don't have personal time. Now I'm mad at you, mom or dad or whomever, for taking this away from me. And more so, when I say it's time to do X, we let it all drop and there's no complaints. It's because this is sacred time, right? And it's a lot easier to regulate those things in a way that become now a supportive experience with technology in our lives versus something where you're, just always coveting the device. And it's more of coveting the time that we have together.
Yes, and that's important. And that's something that, I cannot stress enough to parents, that sacred time. My children, my husband and I both work from home, and we have long before the pandemic. So, and my job revolves around social media. I'm always connected.
Yeah.
But, when you have a young child and you're saying, hey, can you put your phone down, and you're on your phone, it doesn't matter to them if you're working or not. So I think it's important, that sacred time, it really needs to be applied to the whole family. As hard as that is for us as parents, as hard as it is to say, you know what, I've got this deadline and I've got this project, but I'm supposed to be off my phone at 5:30. We really need to stand firm, hold to that sacred time. There's always room for adjustments. Maybe you only have 30 minutes instead of an hour one night, but still take that time and really, really disconnect with your kids. So it's not just something that you're telling them to do, it's that example that you're giving them as well. And then what happens during that time?
Exactly. The transition is a big thing, because when it's like, oh, get off your device. Okay, well, why? I just want you to get off. You're spending too much time. But what am I going to do now?
I want you to sit there and stare at me.
Yeah, exactly. What is the active transition into something else? We're going to have dinner. We're going to, I want you to go outside and just get some fresh air. Giving them a very specific transition for why they're getting off versus just,
what are we doing?
Just because I said so, it's not, you're, as a parent, you're going to expect them to do it anyway, but at the same time for the kid, you're gonna be like, well, this does nothing for me. And now instead of understanding why, I'm just going to resent you and not understand why.
Right. And it's a great way, if you can commit in that transition period, you get to know your kids. And, I've said that I have no shame in that, knowing that I have a 22-year-old and a 17-year-old. They're my kids, so I know my kids, but I had to get to know my kids, their interests. Their interests change. Why did you go from, you love this band to now you don't want like this band, and now you really like this band, and that's great. But what happened in between? And, really letting them know that they can talk about their interests and that you want to get to know. I have no idea what you're talking about when you're talking to me about guitar chords, but I want to hear about the song that you learned to play. I not only want to hear you play it, but tell me how you learned. What was your process? I want to know these things. So, it doesn't have to be stagnant time just because you're off your devices. Really encourage conversations, ask questions about them, encourage them to ask questions about you. What do you do for work? Why do you have to do this? What type of involvement? They may not want to know what their parents do for work, but they might surprise you with the questions that they ask. So,
if you don't create the space, you'll never know.
Yeah, they'll never know. My boys spent years probably, what does your mom do for work? She's on her computer.
Yeah.
What does your mom do for work?
My kids think I develop games. I'm like, I don't develop games. We look at how games can affect the way that we learn and enjoy.
I don't create them. So, the space, encourage that conversation. This was also important. And a lot of times it's not something that I think people think of first when they think of internet safety, but how can parents protect their children's identity and information as they become more ingrained in technology?
Yeah, so I think one of the main things is just understand your privacy settings in apps or websites. Now, it can be hard because that's one of the first things that come up, and it's like 8 font, 32 pages. And so it's one of the reasons why we say if you kind of common sense, we did all the work for you. You can go to get a sense of what are the privacy implications of a certain tool and you need to consider. So that's one way you can do it. Or you can go through it and just kind of get some high level understanding around the privacy settings that you can set or can't set and what it's doing with the information. Another way is enabling two-factor authentication when it goes into going to different resources or tools. And all that allows is just to make sure that no one else is getting into your app, your account, or whatever those things might be. I would also encourage for parents, you tell your kids, you never share their passwords with anyone, especially if you have older kids. You don't share it with your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or whatever, or your best friend, but they have to share it with you. Like as a parent, you should always have access to those things, especially if they're using it under 13, especially because they're not even supposed to be on certain types of platforms. But those are important. And then, not using unsecure Wi-Fi networks. I think that's part of the hard part though, especially when we're going into communities where, they're looking for public access because they don't have their own. So it's hard in that sense. So that just means you really need to understand kind of what is it doing with the information and all the different things you're you're following on there. But then also if you're using a device like a phone or a tablet, you can set those things up pretty easily. So there's kind of like swipe options for how you want certain services to be deactivated or not, as you're
And it
thinking
can be
about the
intimidating,
privacy.
but the option is there. Definitely. That's important for parents to
Totally.
know. Look it up. You don't have to know how to set these. You can find a guide, a tutorial, but that's important. And there are a lot of safety tools out there. You just have to be
Yeah.
willing to, when my boys were little, we family kind of spread out and email. This is before they could get online or even text with the phone, but they had computers. So email played a large role in communication. Just because they had an email address didn't mean that I wanted them getting all
Yeah.
the email that's open to them. So
Yeah.
we would, through Gmail, there are paid services that people can find, but through Gmail,
Sure.
we got a forward of everything that came to their inbox, every single email. And, that was important for me to know, hey, this person sent you this email. Do you know them? Is this important? So just, I like that, really encouraging parents that it's, you can be frightened of the internet and what's out there, but there are settings and steps that you can take to make it a little bit safer for your children.
Yeah. I mean, as much these apps and tools and sites want to make it very easy for you to get onto the site and make it hard for you to understand what's actually happening with it. But that's why you've got folks like Common Sense, where we want to make it easier for you to understand what's happening with it so that you can go understand what it means to go the easy route with signing up. What are the implications? We want to make finding out about the implications just as easy as getting on and using the tool. And then I think the one thing, very small, basic thing, cover your cameras, whether it's a Post-it or like a webcam, cover. Like some of the highest ranking CEOs of these big tech companies whose platforms we're on, they're covering their cameras all the time, right? They've got a Post-it or a little swipe thing. So it's a very basic thing if you think about privacy. You never know when your camera might automatically go on because of a tool or an app that you've given, the agreement to monitor or use. So it's always just best practice, keep it covered unless you mean to use it.
That's a good tip, but I used to do that too. And then, more virtual meetings, it's just easier to keep it on. But I do utilize a device that lets me know with light and,
Great.
something that does let me know that it is on. But that's important. And I would tell my kids that they got phones when they were really early because they would travel, they would go to summer camps, and I really wanted them to have a way to communicate with me. And based on what was available at the time, it just made sense for them to get smartphones. And that's overwhelming when you have an 11-year-old who has an iPhone, but it was what was available.
Yeah.
And that was one of the
Exactly.
things that we talked to them, cover the camera, even just a little piece of tape. It's fine, not clear tape, obviously, but they would play with, they would make, duct tape stuff, wallets and stuff that, it was a
or even the
phase, so-
iridescent kind of like tape where it
like
just,
the
it just
washi
makes
tape.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a key thing. And it does provide a sense of comfort. And, I think that if you can eliminate that concern, you have more kind of mental capacity to focus on another concern that you can then address rather than trying to address them all at once, do one
all
at a
at
time.
once. Yeah, exactly.
How can parents find the right balance between protecting their children's mental health with allowing them to have an online social life? So how can homeschooling families, as an example, foster healthy online social interactions?
Yeah, that's a big one. I think first of all, we can all relate to just kind of, how media use and often too much of it can have a direct impact on our emotional well-being, right? Like if we're on it too long, and especially being exposed to things that are kind of like downers, algorithms point you to information videos and things that are just kind of a little more, sad or scary or downward. That's just how the algorithms work because it keeps your eyes more plastered to that piece of content, right? So the more time you spend will actually kind of bring your anxiety levels higher, make you feel a little worse, make you feel a little sadder. But there are sweet spots, right? If you spend just X amount, you actually leave feeling really good because you got what you needed from it and didn't fall down this kind of bubble, right? Or this slippery slope. So those are things to consider. We also know that the social emotional challenges that our kids face when they use technology really kind of goes beyond the individual. It's not just them. What they do with it can affect an entire community. And that's just how things go viral, how things get shared really easily and posted or mass texted, right? It's not just about them. They can't just think about this in this kind of their own individual world. These things can affect the entire community really quickly. Example, because when you communicate on digital platforms, right, you make it more likely for for also, as we think about kind of this, how do we keep them safe and feeling comfortable in their well-being? The more you put yourself out there, the more you open yourself up to folks being mean to you, unfortunately, right? It's not everyone's, there are trolls out there that just want to get a rise out of you. I'm not trying to hurt their feelings. I just want to get a rise out of them. But it makes a real, there's a real emotion on my end when I see something. In one of our most recent surveys, the frequency in which young people reported encountering like hateful content or mean content online is substantially higher now than it ever was than in 2018 when we last did the research, right? And unfortunately, the research also found that young people are most likely to encounter this kind of content. That are also those who are likely targets of more online hate or meanness. So folks who are already kind of targets around these things will see more of this compounded than a typical user. And it's just, again, how the algorithm works and starts attaching and connecting different things to you as an individual user, which then affect the community you live in. So it is important to understand that your well-being oftentimes is connected to the way these technologies are built. As a parent, it's hard to understand how all of these things work, right? But that's why it's so important for you to take a little time to see, how does Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, like all these social platforms that we like to be on, and get some really great, rich, fun content, even the meme generation stuff from, how are those algorithms built and how do they work in the sense of what are they pushing my direction? And it gives you a little bit more insight into, especially if you have a teen or a younger kid who might be a little bit more susceptible, or not susceptible, but already received some of these types of experiences that it might be on a more negative side. Why do you need to remove them from it at that point? Or how do you need to discuss, here's how you get past those things and almost break the algorithm so you have a more balanced experience and not just one that leads you into potentially more harmful content.
That was great. I love the focus on, individual versus community. That, as with anything else in life, technology, it's never really ever about one person. I mean, everything, there's a ripple effect. I mean, how you shop for your groceries, to the clothes that you buy, to the path that you take to your friend's house, to work, to school. It's all intertwined, and they're, not all bad consequence or bad ripples. They're great ripples, but there are ripples. And, it's important to talk about that community, when you're, social, more kids and adults having, Zoom dates, play dates, wine dates and dinner date, even adults as friends, we communicated more in the last year online. When you're in group settings, what's happening? What are the conversations? How are they going? Things that, it could be just like a classroom. If you have one person who's going to say something mean, not because they wanted to be mean, they just thought it would be funny, how that impacts everyone in that Zoom meeting.
But it brings a very unique set of challenges being in this digital world now, which is why digital citizenship is one of the big things that me and my team really focus on, working with schools and educators in general, is just calling attention to that digital citizenship has its own unique challenges, and that, technology isn't just purely a substitution of things, because there's so many more layers to it, depending on how you use it. So how do we really empower our kids to think critically, behave safely, and participate responsibly so that they can have a really positive experience, and know that they're a part of this bigger world? Because these experiences are, really require kind of like unique sets of skills and dispositions that students can use to help navigate these challenges. And it takes having these ongoing conversations and opportunities of supporting them to really build up their self-awareness, their social awareness, how they manage relationships, their decision-making. That needs to be reinforced in the way that we support them with how they use it.
And it's kind of wild to wrap your head around social interactions online playing such a large role in the development, even as, at all ages, the continued development. It's a big thing, but it can be a really cool thing too. So the last question, because I know that you've given us so much of your time and I'm so thankful for that. So the last question, what are some resources that Common Sense offers parents, and where can they find them?
Got it. So I would say that for parents who are going to be looking at wanting to bring some kind of experiences around the education side, around like digital citizenship and how they address these issues, I work with plenty of parents that are schooling at home that they've taken our K-12 curriculum and then just brought them and apply them to use in their own home so that they can really talk about these different ideas around digital citizenship and how they look at media balance versus looking at what I mentioned earlier, how algorithms work in schools and or work in technology and how they can apply it to the way they use. So our digital citizenship curriculum is one place. So commonsense.org/education is a great place to find those types of resources. We also have a ton of free resources and tools on teaching digital citizenship and social emotional learning that is available. We've got another great tool right now that we created because of the pandemic. It'll be sunsetting at the end of the year, but it's still available right now, called Wide Open School. So if you're looking for other activities that have been curated across, these great kid-focused platforms around activities you can do around math and reading and science and going on virtual field trips and everything, you can just go to wideopenschool.org and be able to find resources appropriate for the age of your kids that can span everything from core content to other activities, just kind of expose them and widen their opportunities for learning. And then we've got a number of, if you're looking at what are the tools I want to bring into the lives of my kids, you should take a look at our ed tech reviews or even just our general media reviews on Common Sense Media, where you'll find as a parent just kind of how to look at it through a parent's eyes. And then if you go to commonsense.org education, you'll look at the resources through an educator's eyes. What is the learning pedagogy behind this particular tool? How could it support the learning for my kids? So all under the same Common Sense umbrella, but with a different context in how you look at the media piece. Common Sense Media for parents, Common Sense Education for the educator context.
That's great. And you brought so much information to the chat today. So thank you so much for all of your time. I think it's so important to recognize, like we talked about early, the value in technology. Because you're concerned doesn't mean that you don't want to embrace this. You just want to make sure that you embrace it in a way that aligns with your worldviews, but also and with who your family is. But just to know that you can still safely embrace it. And I love everything that you brought here. And I hope that it's been as encouraging. I'm a longtime tech user, and it's encouraging to be able to chat about things that I may not thought of, I didn't think about in that way at that point in their lives, but it's something that I can think about now or moving forward. So I appreciate you sharing all of that, and the resources at the end, definitely. So thank you so much, Merve. And I just, good luck with everything as more and more people continue to come to technology through that thrust of, societal need, or even just through, a genuine interest. So good luck. And I wish you well and
really I appreciate the space.
Families.
Yeah. And I hope I could be helpful to you families out there. So.
Definitely. Thank you so much. That's it for today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about our homeschooling program, please visit time4learning.com or email me at the address on the screen. We're happy to connect you with a wealth of information like videos, resources, and blog articles. Until next time.